two. Are you hearing anything? Mic check. No, just 16 is supposed to be open. Oh, we probably have another mic. Probably have another mic. Oh, Zena's is all. Oh, yeah, yeah. Okay, so you're hearing me now, right? All right.
Prince of Wales and all the royal family. Give grace to all who exercise authority in our Commonwealth, that peace and happiness, truth and justice, religion and piety may be established among us. Especially we pray for the governor of our islands, the premier, the speaker of the Legislative Assembly, the leader of the opposition, ministers of the cabinet, ex-officio members and members of the Legislative Assembly, that we may be enabled faithfully to perform the responsible duties of our high office. All this we ask for thy great name's sake. Let us say the Lord's Prayer together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. The Lord bless us and keep us. The Lord make his face shine upon us, and be gracious unto us. The Lord lift up the light of his countenance upon us, and give us peace now and always. Amen. And remembering King David in Psalms, pray for peace in Jerusalem.
Please be seated. Proceedings are resumed.
Administration of Oaths or Affirmations. Oath of Allegiance and Due Execution by Ms. Gloria McFeel-Nixon, Acting Honourable Deputy Governor responsible for the portfolio of the Civil Service, to be the temporary ex officio member of the Legislative Assembly.
I, Gloria Michelle McFeel-Nixon, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God. I, Gloria Michelle McFeel-Nixon, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God.
McFeel-Nixon, we welcome you on behalf of members. Again, you're practically a member of this house now. We welcome you.
Reading by the Honourable Speaker of Messages and Announcements.
None.
Presentation of petitions.
None.
Presentation of papers and of reports. The report of the Standing Finance Committee on the Supplementary Appropriation January 2018 to December 2018 Bill 2018, to be laid on the table by the Honourable Minister of Finance and Economic Development.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of this Honourable House the report of the Standing Finance Committee on the Supplementary Appropriation January 2018 to December 2018 Bill 2018, which is in respect to the Government's financial year that will end on the 31st of December 2018.
So ordered. Is the Honourable Minister speaking there too?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in accordance with Standing Order 64-7, the Standing Finance Committee agreed that I submit to this Honourable House the report of the Committee on the Supplementary Appropriation, January 2018 to December 2018 Bill 2018, with respect to the government's financial year that will end on the 31st of December 2018. The committee had its first meeting on the 22nd of November 2018, at which appropriations on the schedule to the bill were scrutinized. The committee met earlier this morning to finalize and approve the report that has just been tabled. The committee considered the schedule to the bill and approved the appropriation changes requested thereon. The committee did not make any amendments to the appropriation changes shown on the schedule to the bill. Mr. Speaker, the items on the schedule to the bill can be summarized as follows. Changes made on the authority of Section 11.5 of the PMFL. 1. The vast majority of the appropriation changes requested by the bill were in respect of the reallocation of a previously centrally held in the Ministry of Finance of $4.3 million health insurance premium increase to other ministries, portfolios, and offices throughout the government. As this was a reallocation to an existing expenditure appropriation, there was no increase to government's overall expenditure level as a result of this reallocation. Cabinet is permitted to make such reallocation changes by the authority of Section 11, subsection 5 of the PMFL 2018 revision. There were other items on the schedule to the bill that were made under the authority of Section 11, subsection 5 of the PMFL, and with respect to such items, some of the individually significant matters that were considered and approved by the committee were a $7.5 million equity investment in Cayman Airways, $4.5 million was utilized in the recapitalization of Cineco, and $5.2 million was approved to buy a building and property in central Georgetown for an expansion of the court's premises. There were also, Mr. Speaker, changes made under the authority of Section 12 of the PMFL. And Mr. Speaker, the committee's report also indicates that it considered and approved requests for appropriations that were made pursuant to Section 12 of the PMFL. There were 11 such items on the schedule to the bill that Finance Committee had already approved in July 2018, most notably additional tertiary care expenditures at local and overseas healthcare institutions of $8 million and funds for the purchase of land for conservation of $10 million. Furthermore, there were 2 items on the schedule to the bill that Finance Committee had already approved in September 2018, an additional $6.5 million for tertiary care expenditures at local and overseas healthcare institutions, and $1.9 million for the Green Iguana culling program. Therefore, there were 13 items on the schedule to the bill that Finance had approved prior to its meeting on the 22nd of November 2018, but for the sake of legal formality, those items had to be placed on the schedule to the bill and voted on again by the committee. When the committee met on the 22nd of November, Mr. Speaker, there were 3 items on the schedule to the bill that had not been previously considered by Finance Committee under Section 12 of the PMFL. These were $5 million for additional tertiary care expenditure at local and overseas healthcare institutions. This amount was approved by the committee and when added to the original 2018 budget for this area, along with previous expenditure supplementaries passed in July and September 2018, the current revised amount for this important aspect of the government's budget is approximately $30.5 million for the year ending 31st of December 2018. Secondly, $5 million to increased funding to the Health Services Authority for medical care of indigents was approved by the committee on the 22nd of November, and $2.3 million for outstanding levies payable to the University of the West Indies was approved by the committee. Mr. Speaker, the committee agreed that the report that has just been laid on the table of this Honourable House be the report of the Standing Finance Committee on the Supplementary Appropriation Bill 2018 with respect to government's financial year ending on the 31st of December 2018. It is also important, Mr. Speaker, that I point out that the report just tabled is in respect of appropriation changes made during the period the 1st of January 2018 to the 31st of October 2018. Government intends to bring a second supplementary appropriation bill before the House in early 2019 with respect to any appropriation changes to the 2018 budget that occurred during the period from the 1st of November 2018 to the 31st of December 2018. Mr. Speaker, without touting or blowing the horn of the government, this presents a situation is a significant improvement to the past in which a supplementary appropriation bill for a particular financial year was brought to the House as much as 3 to 4 years after the particular financial year has ended. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Questions to honourable ministers and members of the Cabinet?
None.
Statements by honourable ministers and members of the Cabinet?
I have received statements from the Honourable the Premier. Not this one. Next.
Next meeting. Yes, sir. Personal explanations?
None.
Obituary and other ceremonial speeches?
None.
Raising a matter of privileges?
None.
Commit business. Bills? Report on bills. The Supplementary Appropriation, January 2018 to December 2018, Bill 2018.
The Honourable the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am to report that the Supplementary Appropriation January 2018 to December 2018, Bill 2018, with respects to the government's financial year ending on the 31st of December 2018, was considered by the Standing Finance Committee, and the bill was passed without any amendments. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The bill has been duly reported and is set down for a third reading.
Third reading, the Supplementary Appropriation, January 2018 to December 2018, Bill 2018.
The Honourable the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the Supplementary Appropriation January 2018 to December 2018 Bill 2018 be given a third reading and passed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The question is that a bill shortly entitled the Supplementary Appropriation January 2018 to December 2018 Bill 2018 be given a third reading and passed. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, the ayes have it. The Supplementary Appropriation January 2018 to December 2018 Bill 2018 has been read a third time and is now passed. Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move the adjournment of this Honorable House until 11:30 today, Monday, 17th of December, 2018.
That the Honourable House do now adjourn until 11:30 a.m. Many times I take it for granted that we are all in agreement with the adjournment. Those in favor of the adjournment, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, the House stands adjourned until 11:30 a.m. Prayers will be read by the Honorable Deputy Premier.
As the Christmas season is upon us, we certainly offer Christmas blessings to all members. Almighty God, from whom all wisdom and power are derived, we beseech thee so to direct and prosper the deliberations of the Legislative Assembly now assembled, that all things may be ordered upon the best and surest foundations for the glory of thy name and for the safety, honor, and welfare of the people of these islands. Bless our Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth II, Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, Charles, Prince of Wales, and all the royal family. Give grace to all who exercise authority in our Commonwealth, that peace and happiness, truth and justice, religion and piety may be established among us. Especially we pray for the governor of our islands, the premier, the speaker of the Legislative Assembly, and the leader of the opposition, members of the cabinet, ex officio members, and members of the Legislative Assembly, that we may be enabled faithfully to perform the responsible duties of our high office. All this we ask for thy great name's sake. Let us say the Lord's Prayer together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and glory forever and ever. Amen. The Lord bless us and keep us. The Lord make his face shine upon us and be gracious unto us. The Lord lift up the light of his countenance upon us and give us peace now and always. Amen.
Please be seated. Proceedings are resumed.
Administration oaths or affirmations. Oath of due execution by Ms. Gloria McField-Nixon, Acting Honorable Deputy Governor responsible for the portfolio of the Civil Service, to be the temporary ex officio member of the Legislative Assembly.
Please rise.
Yeah, this is the one. Thank you.
I, Gloria Michelle McField-Nixon, do swear that I will well and truly serve Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II and her heirs and successors and the people of the Cayman Islands in the office of ex officio member of the Legislative Assembly, so help me God.
McField-Nixon, we consider you have been truly welcomed. But we repeat it, you are welcome as the ex officio, the Honorable, the Acting Deputy Governor. Please be seated.
Reading by the Honorable Speaker, messages and announcements.
Honorable members, as you can see, there is a new person on the dais with me. He is our new page, Mr. Christopher Clark. In an effort to modernize and give members some very needed assistance and particularly so to our Sergeant at Arms. We have this new page. Hitherto, the sergeant was expected to be everywhere at the same time, and he did his job well. We know that is impossible, and we must understand that, as our public should. The new page will assist him in carrying out his duties. This is somewhat of a historic effort, and I'm delighted that Mr. Clark is here with us. I know he knows something already of the procedure here, as he has watched with keen interest the affairs of the House, and I'm pleased for many reasons for that, as more and more young people need to understand and get involved with the parliamentary process. We are into over 180 years of parliamentary government, and the wheels of progress for the services members need here have moved exceedingly slow. And I hope that the new autonomy bill will have gotten all of the desired feedback for passage sometime early in the new year, hopefully in the next meeting of the Honorable House. And I hope, too, that funds will be able to be allocated for the security measures we have agreed and the small bits of new space that is so badly needed. I do want to put on record my sincere thanks to the Honorable Acting Deputy Governor for her keenness to help, and indeed the help she has rendered and afforded me as Speaker, and the professional manner she go about doing good. And we expect a little bit more. But thank you very much, Mrs. McField-Nixon, the Honorable Acting Deputy Governor, for what you have done since the new government. Mr. Clark, you will know by now that the Speaker don't speak. And when the opportunity is afforded, the Speaker speaks.
Presentation of petitions.
None.
Presentation of papers and of reports.
None.
Questions to the honorable ministers and members of the cabinet.
None.
Statements by the honorable ministers and members of the cabinet.
I have received statements by the Honorable the Premier. The Honorable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as this Honorable House will recall, last month I confirmed to members and the public that the United Kingdom government had agreed to begin talks with the Cayman Islands on proposals for various safeguards to our Constitution. These talks did occur over 2 days in London, Friday the 7th of December, and again on Monday the 10th at the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. I am pleased to report to this House, Mr. Speaker, that the 2 days of talks went as well as one could have hoped. Indeed, I regard them as having been constructive and fairly positive. And for this, I would like to thank the Cayman delegation as well as the delegation from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office in London. I wish to especially thank Sir Geoffrey Jowl, QC, for the excellent preparatory work done that allowed us to not only make an excellent case for reform, but also for the very clearly drafted proposals provided to the FCO prior to the talks. These made it easier for the United Kingdom government to readily understand our position and to take a position themselves. I extend my gratitude as well, Mr. Speaker, to our own Attorney General for his excellent contribution and solid recommendations to our effort. These were important talks, Mr. Speaker, that took us over 6 months to arrange. I acknowledge the work done by our London office, in particular the head of that office and our representative in the UK, Mr. Eric Bush, in assisting to get the dates pinned down. Mr. Speaker, as you know, we sought these discussions in the aftermath of a breach of convention and possible constitutional overreach when in May this year, the House of Commons legislated for the British Overseas Territories in the area of domestic policy. As all members of the House will know, responsibility for domestic policy has been devolved to the territories under the terms of their respective constitution orders made by Her Majesty and Privy Council. Contrary to the long-standing convention, the United Kingdom Parliament sought to legislate for the territories in an area of devolved responsibility by attaching an amendment to the Sanctions and Anti-Money Laundering Bill that was making its way through the United Kingdom Parliament. The bill with the amendment was passed by the Commons and then later by the House of Lords in May. This amendment requires the British Overseas Territories, but curiously not the Crown Dependencies, to establish public registers of beneficial ownership and to do so no later than the 31st of December 2020. Failing this, the amendment requires the United Kingdom government to utilize an order in council to change local legislation to force the governments of the territories to implement public registers of beneficial ownership, thereby effectively legislating directly on a matter that has been devolved to the local governments. This break in long-standing convention and overreach by the UK Parliament represents a line that once crossed cannot be uncrossed. The concern is therefore not just about beneficial ownership registers, but about what other areas of devolved authority the UK Parliament may feel it should interfere in without at least consulting with the Cayman Islands government. And so, Mr. Speaker, the safeguards we seek will confirm that the Cayman Islands government has autonomous capacity in respect of domestic affairs, and that the United Kingdom will not seek to legislate directly or indirectly for the Cayman Islands without, at a minimum, consultation with the Cayman Islands government. Prior to the meetings in London, as I mentioned before, the government provided the Foreign and Commonwealth Office with proposed constitutional changes in draft form. These proposals were discussed with the opposition prior to the trip to London, and again with the leader and deputy leader of the opposition while we were in London. I wish to thank the leader of the opposition and his deputy for the able assistance during the talks in London. I also want to thank those on the government bench who also ably assisted with the negotiations, the Minister for Commerce, Planning and Infrastructure, and the Minister for Financial Services and Home Affairs. Mr. Speaker, not only did the country see before we left for London that the government and the opposition both recognized the importance and necessity of the safeguards being sought, but in London, the United Kingdom government was presented with a solid Caymanian front, with the Premier and opposition leader, together with our delegation, sitting not on two separate sides, but united in the cause of defending our beloved islands. In addition to addressing the principal concern mentioned earlier, the opportunity was also taken to seek a small number of administrative changes to the current constitution in order to improve the operations of the local government and legislature. I am pleased to advise, Mr. Speaker, that by the end of the talks, the majority of the proposed changes were agreed in principle, while the remainder is still under consideration by the United Kingdom government. Mr. Speaker, United Kingdom officials listened and genuinely sought to be helpful, whilst asserting that the UK's interests and its ability to ultimately legislate for its territories must remain paramount. We are a British territory, and so we understand this, but we argued our case, hammering home the points we needed to make. And Mr. Speaker, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office team certainly did seek to understand our positions and provide suggestions to address the concerns where they thought they could. Mr. Speaker, the United Kingdom government has committed to formally responding to us in the coming weeks. This formal response will include a draft order in Council that will confirm the matters already agreed in principle and provide the UK's proposals on how to address the matters that were left to be considered. Once the UK's response and draft order in Council are acceptable to the Cayman Islands delegation, then the constitutional negotiations will be considered concluded, and the proposed amendments with draft order in Council will be published and later debated in this legislative assembly. Mr. Speaker, everyone in this House will be aware of the challenges that the United Kingdom government is now going through with Brexit, challenges that are impacting the UK's internal policies. In recent days, there was even a no-confidence vote called on the Prime Minister within her party. The Prime Minister won that round, but things are still poised on a knife's edge politically in the United Kingdom. These safeguards we seek on behalf of the Cayman Islands cannot be allowed to be caught up in the UK's internal Brexit cauldron as it heats up and boils. So I'm grateful to the United Kingdom government for seeking to conclude these negotiations as quickly as possible. This is also in our interest. So I, and I believe this House, commit ourselves to seeing this through as best we can within a reasonable time frame early next year. Following debate, and if approved by the Legislative Assembly, and subsequently by Her Majesty and Privy Council, the proposed changes are expected to come into effect in time for the 60th anniversary constitutional celebrations in July 2019. I wish to thank the team providing administrative support for the Cayman delegation in London, Mr. Samuel Rose, the Cabinet Secretary, Mr. Roy Tatum, the head of the Office of the Premier, Mr. Jason Webster, the Cabinet Office Policy Analyst, and Ms. Jana Pucci-Bush, personal assistant to myself as Premier. I thank the United Kingdom team, also, Mr. Speaker, which included Mr. Ian Henry, Constitutional Advisor to the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and someone who's well known to the older heads in the House, Mr. Ben Merrick, Director of the Overseas Territories, and Mr. Will Gelling of the FCO, and Greg Reisman, Assistant Legal Advisor to the FCO. His Excellency, the Governor, Mr. Martin Roper, also attended. I would like to again thank all members of both delegations for the hard work and constructive dialogue during the 2 days of talks. On the UK side, I particularly wish to thank Lord Tariq Ahmad of Wimbledon, Minister for the Overseas Territories, for his approach when working with us and with all the territories. Lord Ahmad, I believe, presents a real sense of partnership and friendship to the United Kingdom's relationship with its territories that is greatly appreciated. Indeed, despite a very hectic and uncertain week of Brexit debates in London, Lord Ahmad ensured that he was able to keep his finger on the pulse of the negotiations and made time at the start of the talks to meet with me, and again at the end of the talks to ensure sufficient progress was made. Mr. Speaker, we now await the formal response from the United Kingdom government, and I look forward to successfully concluding the negotiations and to publishing them and then bringing them to the floor of this Honourable House for consideration and debate. Mr. Speaker, my second statement on a new ministry. Mr. Speaker.
Is the member for Georgetown Central rising on a point of order?
Mr. Speaker, according to the standing orders, 30 subsection 2, that speech is completed, and I'm allowed to have, with obviously your grace.
You are in accordance with the standing order, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Short questions pertaining to the statement.
Mr. Speaker, I just want the Honorable Premier to clarify that in his statement on page 2, where he says he had discussions with the opposition that it clarifies to the Honorable House that Kenneth Bryan, the independent member of the opposition, was not involved in any discussions in respect to the constitutional changes. Therefore, the people of Georgetown Central hasn't had a voice in respect to these discussions.
Honorable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I clarified that, I think, before at the last meeting of the House, and the member is right. And the fact that he has not been involved in discussions is entirely his alone. I invited him on the floor of this House to have discussions with me following my discussions with the official opposition. I am yet to hear from the member. I am still more than happy to discuss the matters with him. I wish not to exclude any member of this House from such an important matter at all, sir.
Mr. Speaker.
Member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And forgive me for my lack of clarity of what point of order to stand here, because I normally this point of order is done in debates, and this is not a debate at this particular point. But
you can ask a question in relation to what, honorable member, you can ask questions in relation to what the statement says and what the Premier has said.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, what I'm standing on now is a different point of order because of what the Premier just said, which is not entirely true at all.
No,
Mr. Speaker, if we can bring the Hansards into question, because, Mr. Speaker, what is happening now is the Premier is trying to make the listening audience believe that I did not want to be involved in the constitutional discussions of this country, and that is unfair, Mr. Speaker, and very incorrect. Now, if we want to present the Hansards of this House, I'd be happy that we can do that. But all I wanted it to do was be clear that I was not involved in any discussions. There was no invitation outside of what the Honorable Premier said on the floor of the House in the last sitting of the House was I'm as open to what is being said like everybody else. Every other member of the opposition had an opportunity to speak with the Premier directly. I wasn't given that privilege.
I consider that a point of explanation. Premier, do we want to move on and leave it there, or?
Except that the member is being untruthful. I said on the floor of this House, I'm more than happy to meet with the member. I said so to him in the passageway there as well. But the member is doing what he usually does best. He refuses to cooperate with the opposition. He refuses to cooperate with the government. And then he plays victim as though we're trying to leave him out of something. I repeat my offer to the member following this meeting to sit down and go through this with him. If he wants to make a public display about it, that's up to him. But he is being what he usually is, which is disruptive, uncooperative, seeking to gain some sort of prominence, when in fact every other member of this House is cooperating with what is a critically important matter. He is playing political games with it.
I consider we should move to the next statement.
Mr. Speaker, I previously advised this House of the government's intention to create a new international trade and investment ministry, as well as to open an office in Hong Kong. I am happy to advise this Honourable House that both of these proposals have been progressed with the United Kingdom government via the Governor's Office, and that the UK government has formally confirmed their agreement for a new ministry to be established, and have also agreed that it will be called the Ministry of International Trade, Investment, Aviation, and Maritime Affairs. And Mr. Speaker, by way of explanation, the reason why we needed to engage the Governor's Office and the Foreign and Commonwealth Office on this particular issue of the name for the ministry is because these are areas, some of these subjects are areas which are within the Section 55 special responsibilities of the governor. Mr. Speaker, I can also confirm that the United Kingdom has also provided a letter of entrustment that approves the opening of a Cayman Islands government office in Hong Kong, subject to receiving the necessary approvals from the Hong Kong authorities. The UK government and the Governor's Office have also committed to assisting with both endeavors, the startup of the new ministry and the Hong Kong office. It is with the latter that this assistance will be especially useful, and the United Kingdom Consulate General in Hong Kong will provide advice and on-the-ground assistance to get the initiative going, including seeking the necessary approvals from the Hong Kong government. Mr. Speaker, while it is perhaps extraordinary for an administration to create a new ministry in midstream, Mr. Speaker, these are indeed extraordinary times. The principal purpose that brings us here today is to debate and hopefully approve a series of bills that seek to defend the Cayman Islands from being blacklisted by the European Union or falling afoul of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development's Forum on Harmful Tax Practices, the OECD. What we continue to see, Mr. Speaker, is an ever-changing landscape as regards the required regulation of the financial services sector, requirements that are no longer European Union-centric, but are becoming the international standard. And so Cayman must move with the times if we are to maintain a vibrant financial services industry. But, Mr. Speaker, the landscape will continue to change, and the Cayman economic model will continue to face external threats, particularly as a result of the widespread misunderstanding of the Cayman Islands financial services industry and the regulatory regime that underpins it. And despite our efforts to educate and engage with politicians in the United Kingdom, Mr. Speaker, this misunderstanding even extends to Westminster, as we saw earlier this year. And Mr. Speaker, whilst we are all hopeful that the United Kingdom will find a good solution to the challenge that is Brexit, it will continue to face challenges post-Brexit. So we believe we must do our bit to lessen their burden, and at the same time, as I've said before, to step out of the UK's shadow and stand up for ourselves when it comes to matters of international trade. This is the role, Mr. Speaker, that the new ministry will take on. Mr. Speaker, this government recognizes that in general terms, foreign policy or external affairs are functions reserved to the governor under Section 55 of the Constitution. However, that section also recognizes that in the discharge of their normal functions, key ministries will necessarily need to relate to overseas governments and institutions. The Constitution therefore provides that in consultation with the Premier, the Governor may delegate responsibilities for external affairs to elected ministers, which gives them freedom to act within certain prescribed limits. In reality, every ministry has responsibilities that bring them into contact with other jurisdictions or intergovernmental bodies. This varies considerably in scope and in the resources required to develop and maintain overseas relationships within each ministry. Sadly, Mr. Speaker, there is limited joining up of activities across ministries, and from the point of view of partners abroad in both the public and private sectors, the Cayman Islands government can at times be difficult to work with. At the political level, I, as Premier, act as the de facto lead for cross-governmental international activity, and therefore traditionally the Premier will lead significant overseas missions. However, within the civil service, there is no one similarly charged with coordinating or leading this activity. Opportunities to present a coherent and consistent approach to other governments and to potential investors and partners are being missed. The new ministry will provide this coordinating function. In summary, the Ministry of International Trade, Investment, Aviation, and Maritime Affairs will advance the economic and political interests of the government, the Caymanian people, and the local business community, make it easier for potential overseas investors to do business in the Cayman Islands, and to help enhance the reputation of these islands. Generally, Mr. Speaker, the benefits of the new ministry will include improved reputation and promotion of Cayman with key opinion formers in the overseas governments and institutions and in the private sector, increased inward investment as we attract a wider pool of potential investors and make it easier for them to gain access to Caymanian markets, increased tourism and financial services business as we help to open up and secure markets, economic diversification as we're able better to understand and attract an increasingly diverse range of businesses to Cayman, bringing a renewed focus on growing our aircraft and shipping registries. To achieve these benefits, Mr. Speaker, the new ministry will take direct responsibility for the Cayman Islands Government Office in London and a limited range of existing government departments and entities. The ministry will, more broadly, be charged with coordinating the jurisdiction's activities internationally, though many of those activities themselves would remain with existing ministries. The departments, offices, and statutory authorities that will fall within the new ministry will be those that have a principal focus on external trade and customers. They are identified as the Cayman Islands Government Office in the UK, the Department of Investment, to be split off from the Department of Commerce and Investment, the Shipping Registry of the Maritime Authority, the Aircraft Registry, but not the regulatory functions of the Civil Aviation Authority. I wish to make plain that with regards to the last two, that the ministry's role will be limited to the promotion of the shipping and aircraft registries and does not affect the governor's responsibilities over other areas of maritime and aviation affairs. In addition to the UK Government Office, it is anticipated that over time the ministry will develop a network of international offices in locations where their establishment would enable it to better achieve its stated purpose. Proposals for such offices will be brought forward on a case-by-case basis, and as I have mentioned previously, the first business case for the establishment of an Asia office in Hong Kong has already been developed and approved. Mr. Speaker, several potential locations for an Asia office were considered. However, in consultation with key business leaders, it was determined that Hong Kong would be the most advantageous location. That is because of its existing links to Caymanian businesses and government entities and its ideal location as a gateway to other Asian markets. Mr. Speaker, the establishment of the Cayman Islands Government Office Asia will create a focal point to promote all aspects of the jurisdiction in an increasingly significant market. It will strengthen and deepen business ties and provide a gateway for future trade and investment in Asia. It will also facilitate the development of cultural ties between Asia and these islands. The primary focus for the office will be in the realization of economic benefits. It will support the existing twin-pillar industries of tourism and financial services, and also serve to support the diversification of the Cayman economy through establishing links and promoting inward investment opportunities with Asia's highly developed, knowledge-based industrial sectors. Mr. Speaker, a physical presence on the ground in Hong Kong will mean that the office can provide certain real-time support services such as certificates of good standing, dealing with immigration-related queries for Asian visitors, and potentially company incorporation and funds registration in a same-day and time zone convenient manner. This will add tremendous value to the efforts of Cayman-based firms already operating in Asia, and in particular Hong Kong. Previous attempts to establish an office in Hong Kong were unsuccessful, but times have changed. Both the government and the business community share optimism that the new Asia office will provide a springboard for improved business and other links for the benefit of Cayman. And as I've indicated, the UK is also geared up to assist us to make it a success this time around. As I indicated earlier, Mr. Speaker, Brexit is presenting a challenge to the UK and in some regards to its territories. However, we also see opportunities. These include the opportunities that the UK's Global Britain Initiative could bring to Cayman if we put ourselves in the best possible position to exploit those opportunities. The obvious example is our participation in the Great Festival of Innovation in Hong Kong earlier this year. We were very grateful for the Secretary of State's invitation to take part, and we would welcome the opportunity to participate in similar events in the future. We believe that had this new ministry been up and running, we would have been even more effective participants in the festival. And so this demonstrated to us that if we raise our game, we can make the most of the opportunities that working closely with the UK can bring us. In setting up both a new ministry and an Asia office in Hong Kong, the case for change is underpinned by the view that international issues will become increasingly important to the well-being of these islands. It is therefore essential that high caliber and suitably skilled staff are employed, and this will present opportunities for Caymanians to gain invaluable experience and exposure working in the ministry or in the London and Hong Kong offices, and in any future offices that may be opened. Mr. Speaker, the government accepts that there are costs and indeed potential risks in this approach. We intend to provide an annual budget estimated at some $3 million for the ministry and the Asia office. There will be new civil service headcount, but much of the budget will go directly into promoting the Cayman Islands and attracting business. This represents a considerable investment when we are well aware of other potential calls on government funding. However, we believe the benefits I have outlined are significant enough to justify the investment, an investment in the future and prosperity of our people and of our islands. Mr. Speaker, I said at the start that the creation of a new ministry is an extraordinary step resulting from the extraordinary times in which we live. What is not extraordinary, however, is this government's determination to make the right decisions to support our economy, our businesses, and our people. Just one short one on GMC. The government been busy, you see. What? The government's been busy. Government been busy doing nothing. That's always the case. Even for them, when you were promoting Cayman, they were saying, well, you was traveling all over the place, you know, they want to know what you were doing. And then you get
Continue.
Mr. Speaker, I have one more statement with your permission, sir, concerning the United Kingdom Overseas Territories Association Joint Ministerial Council meetings I recently attended in London. Before I do so, I would like to put on record my thanks to the United Kingdom team led by Lord Tariq Ahmad, Minister for the Overseas Territories, Mr. Ben Merrick, Director of the Overseas Territories, and Mr. Will Gelling of the FCO for organizing the series of successful meetings and events. I would also like to thank the Honourable Minister for Financial Services and Home Affairs, the Attorney General, the Cabinet Secretary, and the Cayman Islands London office, led by Mr. Eric Bush. Mr. Speaker, the London office did a splendid job organizing several very successful events during the week. In particular, the largest London Friends of Cayman dinner that I have ever hosted, which was very well received by all who attended. I was delighted, Mr. Speaker, that on this occasion, which I think is the first time that's ever occurred, we were able to also have with us the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, and Deputy Leader of the Opposition, and also, Mr. Speaker, the Minister for Commerce, all of whom, the latter names, all of whom were in London for the constitutional talks. Mr. Speaker, the week of meetings began with an environment workshop, which I led as President of the Political Council of the United Kingdom Overseas Territories Association, known as UKOTA. This was the first UKOTA environment workshop, and participants included leaders of overseas territories, departments of Her Majesty's government, as well as non-governmental organizations and organizations and charities in the environment sector. I was very pleased to see Nadia Harding, the chairperson of the Cayman Islands National Trust, also in attendance. The topics discussed included environment funding, ocean conservation strategy, and the inclusion of overseas territories in the UK government's The Green Future 25-year plans to improve the environment. Mr. Speaker, I was very happy to share with the attendees at the workshop the good news of the procurement of 634 acres of protected land in the Cayman Islands, which has now increased the protected land in Cayman to some 4,111 acres, equivalent to 6.3% of Cayman's total land mass. The overseas territories are custodians of environmental assets of global importance. Over 90% of the United Kingdom's biodiversity is in the territories, including many endangered species. The overseas territories need to ensure that we receive the support and assistance by way of specialist technical advice, as well as funding for environmental research and protection remains available post-Brexit, when access to European Union funds will no longer be available. Mr. Speaker, as overseas territories, we fall between the cracks, unable to access some international funds because they say we're too rich, but also unable to access UK domestic funding. Working with NGOs, universities, and charities may mean we will be able to unlock some of this. Mr. Speaker, following the workshop, the Cayman Islands chaired the UCOTA Political Council meeting. This was our opportunity to discuss matters relating to UCOTA as an organization, as well as discuss and agree positions to be taken at the upcoming Joint Ministerial Council meetings. It was agreed at this meeting, Mr. Speaker, that the Cayman Islands will host the 2019 pre-Joint Ministerial Council meetings at the beginning of July. I look forward to hosting the leaders of the overseas territories' governments on our beautiful islands, not just to progress discussions, but to share with them our culture and to celebrate Cayman festivities that are planned to mark the 60th anniversary of our Constitution. Following this meeting, our delegation met with the All-Party Parliamentary Group for the Cayman Islands. Mr. Speaker, this gave me an opportunity to update the group on how well the Cayman economy is doing and to discuss concerns around the EU blacklisting process and the upcoming constitutional talks with the UK government. On Tuesday of that week, Mr. Speaker, the two-day Joint Ministerial Council meeting between the British Overseas Territories and Her Majesty's government began. And Mr. Speaker, I want to go on record and thank the UK ministers who attended the meetings, despite important debates taking place on Brexit in the House of Commons at the same time. The meeting focused on discussions about Brexit, contingency planning, updates on domestic parliamentary process, trade policies, and development funding. Discussions included an overview of planning for a no-deal scenario in Brexit, trade policies post-Brexit, and potential changes to funding through the Overseas Development Fund. Mr. Speaker, the overseas territories were advised that the European Union funding that supports environment and other projects in the territories will be guaranteed by the United Kingdom until 2020. However, some overseas territories leaders noted that this may create challenges for projects that need longer-term funding. Mr. Speaker, the Cayman Islands is not in that category. We don't get the funding. There followed a lively debate on British Overseas Territories citizens' passports. Concerns were raised that British Overseas Territory passports are now electronically coded with the same electronic code as British passports. For some territories' nationals, this created occasional problems when traveling. It was requested that British Overseas Territories citizens' passports be encoded with a code for each territory to avoid this issue. And Mr. Speaker, just by way, the Cayman Islands is not affected by this, but places like the British Virgin Islands have special arrangements with the United States Virgin Islands in terms of travel, but that privilege is not extended to British passport owners generally, only to British Virgin Island passport holders. So it's in that context that this issue was raised. Mr. Speaker, a key session of the meeting focused on child safeguarding. Territory leaders updated the Joint Ministerial Council on work that had been done in their countries. I was very happy to be able to give an update on the work that has been done over the past year in the Cayman Islands. the advancements of the multi-agency safeguarding hub, training and capacity building, raising community awareness on safeguarding children and older persons, and the restructuring of the services of the Department of Children and Family Services. On Wednesday of that week, Mr. Speaker, the meeting began with overseas territories leaders providing updates on their disaster preparedness. Those territories that were affected by hurricanes last year gave an update on the recovery process. They thanked the United Kingdom government for its help and once again thanked the Cayman Islands for the assistance we provided. The Honorable Minister for Financial Services and Home Affairs gave an update on work that has been taking place on our islands to enhance our resilience to natural disasters as well as to strengthen the regional cooperation frameworks. This includes working with the Governor's Office and the Foreign and Commonwealth Office to pilot the FCO's Crisis Hub. This is a tool that will aid in evacuations and in tracking missing persons during disasters. Mr. Speaker, the Cayman Islands has also agreed to participate in a formal regional overseas territory rapid deployment team that can swiftly provide support for impacted territories. A second new specialist helicopter will be purchased with assistance of the United Kingdom government for use in the Cayman Islands, as well as to participate with disaster relief in the British overseas territories. The Cayman Islands has already begun implementing a national emergency notification system, as well as upgrading the national public safety radio systems. The financial services session centered on the European Union blacklisting process with Mr. Stride, the Financial Secretary to the UK Treasury, noting that the United Kingdom government is committed to assisting the overseas territories during the process. Mr. Speaker, I explained that the Cayman Islands has been actively engaging with the EU throughout the process and is on track to meet our commitment by the end of the year. Discussions moved to the UK's goal to make public registers of beneficial ownership the global standard by 2023. It was noted that although the Sanctions and Anti-Money Laundering Act passed by the UK Parliament in May this year required that an order in council be issued by the end of 2020, requiring overseas territories, but not the Crown dependencies, to implement public registers, the UK expects that such registers will be fully implemented and operational by 2023. So, Mr. Speaker, the effect of this executive decision now of the UK government is that the 2020 deadline is effectively extended to 2023 for the establishment of public registers of beneficial ownership in the territories. I requested once again that the UK extend the United Nations Convention Against Corruption to the Cayman Islands. Mr. Speaker, as you know, this has been a request of the Cayman Islands for several years. And the background to this, Mr. Speaker, is that in this constant struggle that we have about the various regimes that we have in the Cayman Islands, which fight against anti-money laundering, terrorist financing, corruption, bribery, the full range of issues of concern. It is really beyond our, it beggars belief that we simply can't seem to get the United Kingdom government to extend this important international convention to these islands for reasons which none of us can quite understand. And so what has become an annual request of mine at every GMC is that this be extended to us. The afternoon session started with a discussion on trade and investment. A background was provided about the work done by the Caribbean Investment and Trade Advisory Group and the GREAT campaign. Overseas territories leaders were encouraged to determine how these organizations could work with overseas territories on trade matters. Mr. Speaker, as you are aware, the Cayman Islands participated in the UK's Great Festival of Innovation in Hong Kong earlier this year, and I could attest to the benefit of attending. The day closed with a session on the constitutional relationship with the United Kingdom. It was noted that the UK wants to have positive constitutional relationships with overseas territories. The challenge, Mr. Speaker, to the overseas territories and the relationship with the UK that the passage of the Sanctions and Anti-Money Laundering Act in the UK Parliament caused earlier was acknowledged again by the UK government. It was also noted that the UK wants the best constitutional options available for the people of the British overseas territories. The aim is to recognize that overseas territories are self-governing and subject only to the UK retaining power to carry out its obligations on international law. Various territories provided their thoughts, and several have started conversations to revise certain aspects of their constitutions with the United Kingdom. But the Cayman Islands is ahead of the game. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity to report to this Honourable House about the activities around the Joint Ministerial Council meeting, and I commend the statement to the House.
The member for East End.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg your indulgence on the standing order 32 to ask the Premier a couple of short questions. Mr. Speaker, the Premier mentioned the helicopter. I saw some news release where it was 25%, I believe, that they were talking about putting in. Can the Premier tell us if that is so? And if it is so, why haven't they put in more, say 50%? And what are the conditions of the United Kingdom contributing to that, the purchase of a helicopter?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank the member for the question. Mr. Speaker, we issued a substantive press statement on this matter while I was in London on the day that I executed the Memorandum of Understanding with Lord Tariq Ahmad, the Minister for the Overseas Territories. I don't have all of the detail in my head, and I don't have the details in writing at hand, but I can say this much. The helicopter is the property, or will be the property of the Cayman Islands government. It's not the property of the United Kingdom government. So they have agreed because they wish essentially for the Cayman Islands to become the sort of regional hub for the overseas territories, not just the overseas territories, but principally the overseas territories, to be able to deal with crises and to deploy from here. So in exchange for that, they have contributed, and they've already paid the money, 25% of the cost of acquiring the helicopter, which we estimate to be somewhere around $11 million. I think it's a little more, closer to 12 probably. And to also contribute 25% of the cost of the operational and maintenance cost of the aircraft for 5 years. As I say, as consideration for us being able to deploy this aircraft in situations where it is necessary. Principally in overseas territories, but perhaps even regionally, like places like Jamaica, if there is a need for it. Although you would think that the necessity for that would be much less than BVI, TCI, Anguilla, Montserrat. As I say, we've issued a press statement, which I can have called up, and which has in considerable detail what the actual arrangements are.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I saw that press release, but the minutiae was not in there, like whether this is a grant or it's a joint purchase and caveats to go along with it. The Premier can answer that, but my other question to the Premier was, in the UK, expecting the registers, that is the beneficial ownership registers, to be in place now 2023, or does that include the CDs, Crown-dependent territories, as well?
Mr. Speaker, I'll deal with the sort of his supplementary to the other point. I repeat, the new helicopter will be the property of the Cayman Islands government. The arrangement with the UK is initially for 5 years. If we decide to terminate the agreement, we simply have to pay them back no, it's not a loan at all. We have to pay them back on a prorated basis. What is remaining in terms, because what they've done is essentially amortize out over the 5 years. Over the 5 years. So, but it's our aircraft. It's not theirs. And this arrangement is we're going at their request. It's not as though we've asked them for the money for it. But they think, given what we've been able to do in recent times, particularly last year during the hurricanes and aftermath of hurricanes in the region, that we've got the ability to actually help our brothers and sisters in the territories and assist the UK in the discharge of its obligations in that regard. And we think it provides a great opportunity. We'll have one more tactical officer on the team. We'll be able to send one of the tactical officers, who the member from East End knows very well, for training overseas for an extended period. And so we think overall it's just helping us with the development of our capacity here to deal with not just disaster situations, but rescues at sea and general surveillance from the police standpoint. So to move on to the second question, no, this issue does not, as I've repeated, the effect of the amendments to the sanctions and the sanctions and anti-money laundering bill, now Act, do not apply to the Crown dependencies. But all indications are, I am told, from the authorities in the UK, is that the CDs will be brought on board by the time we get to 2023. As the old man West Bay had said, I get you as cheap as I buy it.
The member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise also on Standing Order 30, subsection 2, for a few short questions for the Honorable Premier.
It's allowed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just for clarity, and not coming from a facetious standpoint at all, but in paragraph 5 of page 3, the Honorable Speaker, Honorable Premier said that the public registries are not expected to be implemented until implemented and operational until around 2023. And I see that as a positive. I think it gives us more time for the global standard element. Was that initiated by the talks by the Honorable Premier and their team, or was that something that was happening throughout all the overseas territories?
Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I believe it has been the result of the significant pushback that all of us have given about this and the constant complaints, and they believe that the extra time will allow in their words, the rest of the world to catch up, because the UK is seeking to have this as a global standard by 2023. And as I've said before, if it is a global standard, we have no argument with it, because then we're not uncompetitive. We're not likely to be subject to regulatory arbitrage with business migrating somewhere else. And so they are hopeful, which I think is being very optimistic, but that this will be a global standard by 2023.
Last supplementary, Mr. Speaker.
Georgetown Central.
I'm hoping that this, would it be fair to say that that could be perceived as a positive thing and a softening, so to speak, of the fear of the public registry, because if they ultimately are correct, then the effect of the negative concerns of public registry wouldn't be so impactful. So this would be somewhat level of good news for our financial services if there is such a thing.
Honorable Premier,
The member is right, Mr. Speaker.
I think
Personal explanations,
none,
obituary and other ceremonial speeches,
none,
raising a matter of privileges,
none.
government business, bills, first readings.
I think it appropriate that we break for lunch. We'll get ourselves back on time. We'll come back at 2 o'clock. The House will now suspend proceedings.